appropriately at 4 o'clock, we are going to call to order the November meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. For the record, all members are here. And tonight, I mean all members are here because we are joined by our newest member, Doug Hill. I've known Doug for 4 minutes right now, so I am going to ask my colleague, Ralph, to officially welcome and introduce Doug, assuming he has his breath.
I do, thank you, and I'm pleased and honored to do so. Doug is a person that I consider both a friend and a mentor. I got to meet Doug in the course of business a few years ago, and other than that, I've gotten to see Doug out on Front Street, where he's an avid distance runner, and him and his wife are big city enthusiasts. And I think that we had a vacancy left us with big shoes to fill, and I'm pleased that Senator Scarnati and his office were able to find a man of good honor and stature who I think will, I know will be an addition to our board. And on a personal note, just excited to get to work alongside with you, Doug.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, I know from your resume, you know the roots of all of this, so we'll look to you certainly from a historical perspective as well as current. We've all had a chance to review the minutes, I believe.
Mr. Hill has.
You're doing speed reading right now. And I'd like to ask if there are any corrections. And if not, could I have a motion to accept them?
So moved.
Second. Any other comments? For the record, they're accepted. Jeffrey, would you give a brief report on the financial status of the ICA, please?
Right, so in the past financial period, we had 9 invoices that we paid. We started the period with a starting balance of $55,056.43 in our coffers, and we have a final balance after the financial period of $44,556.68. So we are still depleting the money from our year one disbursement from the state. We will note, however, that we have made the official request for our year 2 funding, and it is quite possible that the next time that we meet, we will have in hand our year 2 proceeds to replenish our dwindling checking account for all the things that we want to continue to do. There is interest earnings of $5.96 on our money so far year to date. So that is our report of the finances of the authority.
And as everyone knows, we have a 5-year commitment from the state, so $100,000 a year. Since our last meeting, I think we've made progress on a lot of fronts. So October flew by, November is flying by. Our website is up. Will continue to be refined, but I do think it already provides a valuable resource for a lot of the documents that we have as an ICA, as well as some of the links to City of Harrisburg and other documents that Jeffrey finds and thinks are important for people to have easy access to. Ralph and I continue to have meetings with stakeholders and try to gather as much insight and as many perspectives to continue to make the work of the authority as effective as possible. On a project basis, we have for a long time wanted to create a document that summarizes our mission and our priorities. And I'm happy to report that such a document, which is short and concise, has been created and reviewed by the entirety of the board. And I thought I would just share a little bit of the meat for those assembled, as well as Doug and anyone else who may not have had a chance to read it. in two sections to focus on. One is 3 themes that we identified that we thought we could help to advance the financial recovery of the city. And those themes are sound financial reporting and management, community and economic development, and operational excellence. And the specific issues within this that we're focused on are the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement with the city. I'll give you an update on that in a little bit. The authority's annual reports, there are 2 that we have to file annually, one coming up at the end of December, which is just on the ICA. The city's 5-year financial plan, we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes as well. The city's community and economic development plan, financial management and reporting, program management with federal funding, information technology infrastructure, debt load and restoring access to credit markets, labor agreements, privatization initiatives, and intergovernmental cooperation opportunities. I think these are probably known to all of us. Certainly we've had a chance to talk about them, many of them with the mayor. So we want to put this in the permanent record, so I would ask if someone could make a motion to adopt this as the mission and priority statement for the Intergovernmental Cooperation for Harrisburg.
Make that motion. I'll second.
Any other comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. I mentioned the agreement update and for the agreement, and I wanted to give a brief summary. After the last meeting, where we had 2 very different documents, Ralph and I had a chance to sit down with the mayor and really talk about the 2 versions and clarify what I think were some misperceptions. And so the great news was it was a matter of just providing clarity on both of our sides, to the point that we could then say to Neil Grover and Jeff Engel, could you please work on actually reconciling the language? And they are doing that right now. I have made progress. We're still each, I think, contributing some more pieces to the pot, but I have no reason to doubt that we won't have an agreement to approve at our December meeting. So I'm very excited, because I know that's something we've worked long and hard on, and it's integral to our relationship. And so to have that progress as much as it has in 4 weeks is a testament to both the mayor, his staff, and I think to our collective board, and certainly Jeff. So thank you. I think we're cruising. Great. Don't jinx
Audrey,
it.
if you want me to just say,
Oh, yes.
I did meet with Neil. We did meet on Saturday. There.
I know, very impressive.
Football time, prime time. We gave up our Saturday.
Because you took a half day on Friday.
That was my birthday, so.
Yeah. They say it's your birthday.
I had to make some time. So we did meet for about 2 hours on Saturday, and we structured our meeting around the topic points that you all discussed in the meeting, and I think we were both happy that we were able to come to some agreement on those things. So he's working on getting, I think, Article 2 and 4 changed a little bit. I'm going to get Article 3 changed, which was the community economic development portion. Audrey's giving me some ideas on that, and hopefully we can have something by the end of the year.
Wonderful. Many of you know the audit meeting was just 2 weeks ago, I think. Audit committee meeting. And unfortunately, pardon?
I was able to pick up.
Oh, thank you for picking that up. We have it on videotape so that now we can all pretend we were there. But realizing that we couldn't all be there because the timing was just not right, Ralph was there, and obviously Bruce was there. And I've asked Ralph if he would be willing to share his observations, his perspective of the meeting. And then we've asked Bruce and Mark Woolley of the mayor's staff to also provide some additional information. So I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. I was able to attend, as Audrey mentioned, I was able to attend the audit committee meeting, and the city's auditors, Mara Dussel, is in attendance, and they presented their reports. There was a number of city officials there as well. I think it follows a narrative that everyone's on the board has come to understand over the last few months of work with the city. The city's come a long way. I mean, that's the first real major highlight is it's, and I hope that no one forgets this, the city's finances right now, the snapshot of the current finances is in good shape, and the auditors can verify that. I think from our perspective, we always want to keep that in mind, and we want to be cognizant of that. And really, I think there's a lot to celebrate, and a lot of it happened. I mean, all of it happened before we were in place. And I think there's also serious issues, and I think the city is aware of them, and the auditors are able to highlight them as part of their report. And I think the issues, the serious ones, are really grouped under sort of three themes. One of them has to do with the accounting rules governing accepted accounting standards for government accounting under GASB. It is complex, and it's different than what those of us in the private sector use for accounting standards, and they change a lot. And so I think that's one area in which, for the city to be able to produce what are considered GAAP accounting statements, it's more work than it has been in the past, and that's one area in which it's a serious issue, because the city has to be able to produce GAAP accounting statements, and it's getting done, and it's done correctly for the annual audit, but it's a heavy lift. So that's one area, one big theme, and I think Bruce is going to talk about that subsequent to this. The second area is information technology and infrastructure. Again, this is a known issue. The city's known about it for probably more than a decade, if not more. And it's a serious issue because of the implications to the city of the information technology platform and what happens if it goes down, and which it will eventually if something isn't done. And the expense of it is extremely high. It's obviously a complex project. The city has spent millions of dollars in recent years to address it, but it's a lot. But it's a very serious issue. And the third one has to do with there was unfortunately last year program management issues with programs that involve federal funding, and the city will have to, will have to pay back some federal funds that were used from HUD funding. And that's today we're going to hear from Mark on some of the stopgap issues to try and pick that up. And again, that's similar to the accounting standards. These are, I think Tina professionally is familiar with the use of these funds and can probably speak to it better. I think our understanding is that it's complex, highly technical, and just it does require very specific expertise. You can't take that for granted how much expertise it entails. So I think generally speaking, there's some material findings in reports from the auditors, and they generally fall under those three categories. So for us, those things that appear in the audit, those do fall under our themes, that fall under our mission as far as assisting the city with fiscal recovery. So it's important for us to continue to work closely with Bruce and his staff, and the mayor's staff, and Mark and others, and stay abreast of those issues. I think that's clearly something very important, a set of important issues for us to stay on top of and assist with. I think I might conclude my sort of summary there as to how my understanding of the presentation. Bruce did send to us subsequent to that meeting. Bruce did send electronic copies to everybody, so you should have them. I think Jeffrey is going to be posting them to the ICA website. We'll also have it as a repository for information. I know Bruce has made himself available to answer questions, although probably best not to email him one by one with a long list of questions. I think the audit report's pretty clear and easy to follow. It's voluminous, and I think everybody has already looked at it. So I'll probably conclude my section of the report there, Madam Chair.
Great. And so, Bruce, if you wouldn't mind addressing some of the gap.
Sure. So let me, part of, I think, my role here is to provide information, because this stuff is actually quite complicated, and sometimes the wording and the vocabulary, the nomenclature can be misleading because it can be understood in different ways. So, going to spend a few minutes sort of putting some of that in perspective. So, I think Ralph had a pretty good summary sort of the audit, and the findings included in that. It should be noted that what the audit is, the financial audit that's required, is about how the financial statements are presented. And historically, that was for secondary investors in the secondary market who wanted to invest in the city's municipal debt, so that they can benchmark the city's financial position versus other municipalities, so you can decide how you want to invest. So that's where that whole sort of reason that this occurs. Now, it has changed over time. As Ralph said, GASB, things become rules and regs promulgate sort of on their own, whether they're relevant or not, I think, to the presentation of the financial statements and how it affects what an investor is, I think, maybe marginally productive or not. And I can't really, Jeff can speak to that too, but sometimes it's just sort of more work than is necessary and doesn't actually provide much relevant information. It is what it is, and you have to deal with it, right? That gets into the technicality and the understanding of standards that change and how it affects what you're doing, what you may have been doing it for years. To be clear, the city audit, we had what was considered an unmodified opinion. So essentially, the auditors are saying that the financial statements as represented were free from material misstatements. So that's good and important and needs to be understood, regardless of the findings. The findings are not really, I don't know how you would interpret it, but they're sort of statements of fact. There's no value judgment behind them. That's important to know. That they have their own guidelines that they have to follow for their own professional requirements. And so, and every auditor is kind of doing it differently in terms of how they present what they see. In terms of the financial reporting that sort of Rob was talking about, let me make clear that what happens is that the city presents to the auditors when they come into the field of work what's called trial balance. Trial balance is for every fund that the city has. And you essentially turn those over and then the audit work starts. You try to have everything, and to get to those trial balances is sort of a complicated and complex process that requires hundreds of hours of work by individuals to get there. So you're basically taking our budget, most budgets are cash-based because that's how you sort of operate, right, in a cash world for revenues and expenditures and activities that occur. You then have to modify those activities and to present what goes on the financial statements, especially what's called governmental funds, such as the general fund or the grants fund or the debt service fund, to what needs to be presented according to GASB, which is the modified accrual basis of accounting. So you go from cash to the modified accrual. But then you have GAAP, which is governs everything. It's not American, not universal, which is international accounting standards, but just American, all financial statements. So there's what's called an accrual fund. So we then have to go from modified accrual to full accrual to produce GAAP statements. And typically, what happens there is you're dealing with a few certain areas, which is fixed assets and CapEx. So you have to capitalize certain costs. Then there's depreciation, which is associated with those capital costs over the useful life of them. And then that's also where the debt liability also resides in the full accrual aspect. Not just your current, which you paid in expenditure, but sort of the actual full liability that you have over time that then gets amortized. And if any changes, once you present those trial balances to the auditors, if they have to make any changes or you have to make any changes, you get this finding that you see here. And that can be rough because sometimes the truth of the matter is you don't always have full information. You don't always have full knowledge. So there's a general issue of institutional knowledge, institutional capacity, and then in certain aspects, not full information that's presented to you timely. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just what happens, whether you're dealing internally with maybe other areas that weren't able to get you that information timely, or outside entities, which we have a lot of relationships with and a lot of complex transactions with. CRW, for example, where one of our, and I'll present a sheet to you here, and you can digest it, because it's not going to happen today around the table, but I have basically, we have to kind of internalize and understand when CRW is doing a project with city funds that was granted by ICA Harrisburg, and if we don't get that information timely or don't really understand that really complex grant relationship, and then the auditors say, actually, you know what, that, for example, we thought, and this is in this document, that an expenditure occurred in 2018, but actually occurred in we thought it occurred in 2019, because that's what the invoice that we had said, but it really occurred in 2018. So that should have been accrued as a liability, rather than an expenditure occurred in 2019. But we didn't know that. And, the auditors actually, because our auditors, because they do CRW's financial statements, and they're like, oh, actually, yeah, when we investigated, that's the actual issue. So even if we had no other issues, and you had that one, you still would have had this audit finding. So I'm not trying to minimize it. It's just that it's important to note that it didn't affect the unmodified opinion of how we present our financial statements. And there's no actual question costs involved. I mean, it's really a matter of kind of sophisticated accounting around often complicated issues relating to grant, project management across internal entities of the city and external entities of the city, and then often capacity of getting information to the finance department or accounting office timely. So I just, so that you have it, we went through and sort of explained sort of that, just and those adjustments that either we have to make after the trial balances are presented, or the auditors make, are in the communications letter that I had sent around. And these kind of go into and explain sort of our, what fund we're talking about, the description of the, what's called an AJE, adjusted journal entry, the debits and credits that's associated, whether the transaction was what we would say routine, complex, or unusual. And routine means that's something that really is kind of standard, but maybe, we didn't really have a full understanding. For example, the HEDVA transaction where we long-term leased the parking garages is actually a transaction that, for the most part, is on the parking authority's books. So we don't really see some of that, and we're just sort of fully internalizing the understanding of that, and we don't always get their work papers to us timely. That's something that we're aware of, and that we have to just, as long as we get that further in advance, we can then, we have a clear understanding of, how to make that adjustment on a go-forward basis. Then you have complex, some of the transactions that I was talking about earlier, where you actually have an outside entity using city funds to do capital projects, which is highly unusual, and from multiple granting sources as well. So that could be. And then there's the unusual, which, stuff that is maybe a one-off thing. And there's some unique things about applying GASB standards that you're just not aware of until you're kind of shown to it, and that gets into the sort of the internal capacity and institutional knowledge aspect of that. I mean, it's important to note that we went back and looked as far as we could find our audits. This goes back into 2005, and there was this audit finding. You know, and to understand, so we had most of our audit prep was done by external third parties in 2013 because audits were not done for 4 years. So all those adjustments to get the trial balances done were done by professional accounting and audit firms, and that our auditor still said, oh, you didn't do that right, we have to make adjustments. It gets into the nature of understanding some of just the internal operational of the work behind the transactions that you kind of have to sort of translate and to put on the books. And then you see here sort of like the attribution, and then sort of whether the accounting manager was involved with the resolution during our field work, and then how we're going to remedy that. And so you can see that here. So I don't know. That's sort of the end of that presentation aspect. And there's a couple other findings that kind of resolve themselves. That's related to finance to some degree, which is the preparation of the CFA, which is the schedule of federal expenditures. That's also an institutional knowledge one that we resolved. It gets into complications of using what's called entitlement funding from federal grants versus program income, which is money, which is revenue that's achieved through some of the projects. And there was previous findings in other years that you were supposed to actually use program income before you do your entitlement monies. And so this is the first year that finding was on our books, I mean on the audit. But truthfully, we didn't realize that you weren't supposed to report program income. We had never done it, and so we didn't know. Now we know, and we won't do that, so that finding won't be occur next year. You know, and then the other one was sort of a double billing that, which is probably not shocking, that when you're having multiple grant sources and you're trying to manage a lot of different projects, department double billed, and you know that shouldn't happen. There was no finding of cost there, but that. You know, that did become apparent when the auditors looked at the list and said, you know, you should do this, and you know, obviously that's the case, but you can see how that can occur when you're having a lot of transactions across multiple projects with somewhat limited capacity. So, you know, that's something you just have to be more cognizant of. So,
Any questions?
I'm just curious, the current accounting software that you guys use, and what's your opinion of where you're at? I mean, I think it's important that the authority hear your
right.
opinion of that.
So, I mean, it's old. It's Panimation. You know, I guess you know.
Well, I didn't know what it was, but I suspected.
Yeah, the company has been acquired and reacquired numerous times, unfortunately, the last couple of years. So the level of support that we've gotten from them has declined. It's not necessarily relevant to the production of statements.
Sure.
We are looking to migrate to a new version because we had not upgraded our software for a very long time. That migration has, because I think of the company, it's been rolled up and you don't have a lot of internal expertise even at the current Central Squares. We went from Panimation to SunGuard, and then there was a third one, and then now it's Central Square, and they're trying to resolve printing issues. So what was supposed to be an upgrade that was occurring in April of this past year is probably not going to occur until April of next year. You know, it's not integrated. You know, it's a Windows-based, you know, client-server, you know, software which doesn't interface directly with the mainframe, which is the revenue system. You know, not that that matters. It's just that there's just that it speaks to the IT issues that we're all trying to address. That costs a lot of money. That we have to figure out how to essentially try to change the internal engines of the city while driving down the highway at 55 miles an hour, which is not easy to do. You know, so it's a challenge that we all are aware of, and that you know we have to deal with and you know work through.
And in a perfect world, obviously, perfectly integrated enterprise resource software,
Which we do not have.
Which you do not have would be a wonderful thing.
Yes.
And it might actually help address
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and that's in terms of the availability of the information, basically, timely, and we realize that that is a limiting issue, and we do have to, I mean, especially as we're doing more projects that are, you know, and we do need, I spoke to particularly, you know, the city engineer who has mostly purview a lot of the large capital projects. But we do have to figure out a way to sort of transmit information more timely, and we talked about just the other day, you know, probably starting to be quarterly, sort of like he does for hats, and, you know, and they talk about, you know, where you're at, you know, it has to include the grants manager, the budget manager. It is something that, because we didn't have these projects inside the city for years, there wasn't this institutional capacity to do this, these processes that's in place. And we do need to now get to a place where those are there. I don't have necessarily what's the perfect way of doing it, but it is something we're aware of doing.
Can I ask a question? Tina, do you want to go first?
I just want, the grants manager manages all the grants that the city receives?
Not all of them, not the federal grants. She's typically the state grants and extra, non-government related.
Non-federal.
Yeah, non-federal.
And there's a separate person that manages the federal grants, the
Yeah.
funding?
Yeah,
That's
the
housing, that's our housing.
DBHD, a whole department does that.
Okay.
And Mark will be speaking about that next.
Correct.
Bruce, do you feel you have the right number of staff people to do this? And secondarily, do you have the people with the right qualifications to do this? This strikes me that if I were suddenly in your position, I wouldn't have a clue of who I should be looking to hire, what type of person I should be hiring to get this expertise.
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
you speak
a
to
lot of the
that?
expertise has to just come with, you know, doing the work. I mean, it's very technical. People we have are very good, but no one's been there longer than 5 years. And that's part of what happened to the city when it was hollowed out, not just financially, but operationally. And we're building up that capacity. And, you know, I've had a hard time filling positions because it is technical, and in a good, better economy, the salaries are not necessarily maybe as competitive, and people have other opportunities. City had a reputation, whatever, you know, and I'm not going to hire somebody that I don't believe can do the work, because that doesn't do anybody good, you know, especially when you have limited staff. You have to really make sure you find the right person, so, you know, we had somebody who unfortunately had to leave for personal issues in September, and in the accounting side, we're looking to maybe restructure there, but, you know, I would say the city never has, and all departments don't have enough staff to do all the work. I don't think that's unusual. We all try to do our best, and we all work very hard, very diligent, and very devoted public servants.
To follow up on that question by Kathy, is the staffing in your department, is it a level of concern, or would it be nice to have more people?
It would be nice to have more people. It doesn't mean that some of these issues wouldn't reappear. It's more of a redundancy of a sustained, this gets into what I talked about, you know, we were in crisis mode, and we have sort of a sustained, you know, a period of you know, normalcy, and then we want to get to sustainability, and eventually if you want to get to a period of sustainability, you've got to have redundancy and internal capacity that allows you to back up and do work in case people leave, or other unfortunate issues that may occur. And you know, we're not at that level yet, but we're trying to get there.
So with the redundancy, you put internal controls in place so that some of the things that happened this go around and in the past will not happen again.
I don't know if I can say that because it's different issues come up, and we just don't know. It's not really necessarily just about the number of people. It's also about the intellectual, the institutional knowledge, and government. I mean, you know, I walked into this myself with not a huge background in that. You have to learn by doing, and a lot of that's just time on task and seeing it again and again. And so it's not always just a number of people; it's also just, you know, actually learning as you go.
I don't mean people. I just meant the processes, like internal.
Yeah, I think our processes are good. They can be better. We're always trying, but you know, we have a lot of internal control memos, and so we do have things documented. Absolutely, we have to have those. In fact, that's what's used by the auditor to see if you're actually doing things the way you're supposed to do them. You have to document it. They look at, here's a result, here's the process, does that match up? So we do have all that.
And then we're going to quickly move to Mark here in a second. I have just one question. I know Tina and I come from the nonprofit world. I've spent our entire careers there. And in the nonprofit world, if you get any sort of finding, it shakes you to your core, and you fix it as quickly as you can. So that's the mindset in the nonprofit world. How does the number of findings that you got compare to other municipalities, not to nonprofits? Because I'm trying to share how I reacted when I saw that, but that was the umbrella under which I approached it. So if you could help say,
I mean,
is it the normal number of findings?
I don't know what's normal. Every municipality is different. The financial reporting one is not an unusual one. You ask our auditors that, they'll tell you that. Because there's so many things that, if one thing is triggered where things were not exactly perfect, as soon as the trial balances, you're going to have this. So in fact, it happens a lot. It's kind of unusual not to have it, to be perfectly honest. Some of the other findings is you don't want to have them, but if you don't know what you don't know until you find out, and then hopefully you can address them. And you can see that we have remedied many of the other findings that we had. That when we all walked into this, a couple of years ago, there was, there weren't audits done for 4 years. So to think that there aren't issues that are still lingering, we're still trying to address some of those. And that's not normal, because Harrisburg didn't come from a normal place, to be perfectly honest. A few years ago, not many municipalities got into the situation that Harrisburg had gotten itself into.
Another question?
Dr. Sheriff.
Can I ask a question about the audit RFP process? Something that came up in the audit committee meeting was the last auditor's contract had sort of ended, and you were in the process of soliciting for a new auditor. Are there any updates, and could you fill us in on what that timeline looks like?
So we got the responses back. We got 5. Not last Friday, but a week ago Friday, whatever the date was. We have an audit RFP committee, and we have a scoring sheet, and we have to read them and evaluate them. They're due back on by Monday morning, and then we're going to get together, see what we have, conduct interviews, and then at some point, either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, because you have to get a contract and get an engagement letter. But we're still under contract with Mark Gussel till the end of this year. We will then have a new 5-year contract, 3 years with 2 optional years.
Bruce, and then what does the timeline look like from there? When does the sort of cycle begin in which you begin working with them on the 2019?
So we do, it's called initial work. A lot of it is cash disbursements testing, typically. And that occurs February, March. Then the audit prep work starts en masse. And then the auditors come in sometime beginning to the middle of June. And then the field work continues till the end of July, beginning of August. Then the auditors go back and do their own work, and then there's a lot of just-in-time stuff that occurs at the end of August, beginning of September. A lot of that involves legal, involved with subsequent events that occurred after the end of the fiscal year that they have to look at. Then we have to develop the CAFR, which is a more comprehensive look at the city beyond just its financial statements. That takes a lot of work on finances staff, the statistical section, and sort of gives a context to where the city's at. But it's a lot of hands-on work. And then the city is under an SEC consent decree, so we have to produce the CAFR by 270 days after the end of the fiscal year, so typically September 30. So the audit then would be issued for the previous fiscal year by that time.
Great,
Last one.
okay.
The last one just goes back to some of the findings and the material weaknesses. One thing I think that is incumbent upon all of us working together on is to try and winnow that list down to zero. And I wanted to make a suggestion or in the form of a question. Do you think it would be a good idea if maybe once we get through this budget season, perhaps in January, as we begin workshopping on some of our the initiatives that we're working on together, do you think that would be a good time, or would it be a good suggestion for perhaps Jeffrey and you to meet and begin to go through the list? I know that there were management responses that you've already prepared as part of the audit responses, and I understand that there's been work done, such as investment in IT, and there's additional management responses, and if so, and if it, again, suggestion.
Yeah, I only can provide so much in my area. The IT stuff is obviously that's
Understood.
beyond my sort of purview. But sure, I mean, I'm
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure.
can't have to have another set of eyes.
Exactly.
I think what would be great is if we could, at this time next year, at this stage, be able to say that all of the material weaknesses have been addressed down to zero. I think the city is working on all of them, which is great. And I think ideally we could say they've either all been addressed, or there's a plan that's addressing all these legacy issues. Just as one example, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but the mayor suggested perhaps funding a position for an additional analyst who could help with, there was a finding about inventory that needs to be done for capital inventory. And if it were a question of budget.
It's not really a finding, that's the management comments, so it's like best practices, but that is the mayor's choice to do that, and we don't have that, and input hasn't been taken.
And certainly not personal expertise, but perhaps if those issues going down the list, if that's something that, perhaps the suggestion would be that Jeffrey, as representative of the board, could work with you on, and we can begin to develop a plan so that we can report that everything either has been or is being addressed, and just supplement your management response.
Sure. Very good. Mark?
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
Here.
All right, so want to give the board just a little synopsis. So I came to the city of Harrisburg October of 17. Part of my discussions with the mayor was, my background is in compliance and in housing. And so he wanted me to focus in on the housing department and seeing what we could do with regard to that. And address some programmatic issues and some compliance issues that he was aware of. So in response to that, almost immediately when I came here, we started working on a lot of these findings. You can see in the document that I just provided to you, with the help of my team, that a lot of these findings that were mentioned in the audit have been resolved, or now are in the process of being resolved. There's about 4 or 5 that we are working with HUD and working our way through. So I saw the list the other day during the audit committee meeting, but I wanted to assure the board that some of these issues have been resolved, and we can go through them, so you can have some comfort level with regard to that. But you can see that some of these findings have been pulled forward from many years. And actually, when I first got here, about 2 weeks after I arrived, I hired Franchon Beeks at the time, Dickinson now, who has since left, to help me go through especially the lead issues. We were able to pull forward and address almost all those issues. Segregation of duties, you can see that was resolved in 2014. Cash management issues with regard to OMB compliance resolved in 2015. And you can read for yourself a lot of these things. But I can go to some of the ones that we currently have and that we're currently in the process of negotiating with HUD our response and their acceptance of the response, and that actually be able to close a lot of these. So we have subrecipient monitoring, and they had commented that there's no process in place to notify subrecipients of award information. So with regard to that, we changed the whole process. We are RFPing our subrecipient award process, and so that people are going to have to actually submit, as they had done in the past, but it's going to be, the criteria is more objective. And prior to that, we held a meeting with the subrecipients to let them know what the criteria was. I think there was some confusion among the subrecipients that you could just continually get grant funding, when in fact you have to do a couple things. One, if you reapply, you have to markedly increase the offerings of what you're offering for the community, at least 25% of what you did before, or you have to have a brand new offering. So we have to make sure that people understand that. They also have to understand that they have quarterly reporting requirements, and if they don't meet certain requirements, we can cut their funding. So we had to set the stage there. We did that, and we're meeting more often with our subrecipients. I'm on page 6. We have the program income, again, it's a finding that's pulling forward since 14. And what we have done is reconcile our accounts. And so that we are making sure that the money that we receive is actually what I call hitting the streets. And hitting the streets and programs that are going to be the most effective in reaching the population that needs it the most. But we have to make sure that we're doing a number of things, not only making sure that the money hits the streets, but that we're in compliance with all the regulations that we have to have. And it could be an environmental report that we have to do, or a series of reports on monitoring. So we're doing that now, and we're making sure that we update our systems, our IES system, in the appropriate year, as opposed to sometimes you have different funds and people were allocating expenses to the wrong funds, and we've eliminated that. Part of the way we're going to eliminate a lot of the compliance issues is that the mayor approved a recommendation of mine to have Laserfiche, which is a software solution, and it really is a cascading one, so that different departments, if they have things that are tied together, they're going to be able to see where in real time a submission of an application is. Or within a department, which is more important for housing, and we just went over that with IT, and we're about to roll that out to make sure that all our compliance efforts, we know exactly where we are in the case of subrecipients, what they're doing, and what we're monitoring. In case of lead, where we are in the process of drawing down funds and getting houses into the queue. So we're changing that whole process, and that's in process right now. We're looking at this. I'm taking this as a microcosm of what I want to do citywide. But if we took the most difficult department with the most regulations and the most oversight, and the mayor said, "Let's go forward. Let's do this, and see if we're going to have some results that we're going to be able to propagate across the city." And I think we're going to have strong results. We've been able to convince HUD that we're going to just revamp the way we're doing our whole lead process, our CDG process, subrecipient process. So they bought into that. We have some high bars to meet over the next year, well, actually over the next 5 years with regard to the lead program, and on a yearly basis with our grant funding. So on page 7, so this is the $152,000 I think that was mentioned before that may have to be repaid to HUD. So let me say one thing. So a lot of these grants, they require a match. And so you go into negotiations with HUD about what you think the percentage is going to be. Our percentage for this particular grant was too aggressive. It was 25%. For the next round that we're about to enter negotiations over the next couple of weeks with HUD, we're going to ramp that down some and make sure that we're going to be able to meet those matches. But with regard to the $152,000, we're not actually going to have to repay that. What's going to happen is that our allocation is going to be reduced. So it's not going to come out of general fund. We're okay because we have some unspent monies from years prior, so there's going to be no loss of programs. And once we get all of our policies and procedures and we show that we're following them, we will have discussions with HUD about maybe seeing if we can augment their allocation to us. But we're okay, there's going to be no loss of services there. We had some specific findings regarding what I take is people being very aggressive and wanting to provide services. And so I always take the point that I'd rather have to reel somebody in and prod them along. So I think this would, in terms of the allowability for this one group, we paid them on a retainer instead of paying them for actually the work that they did. I think that was in an effort to ensure that we had a stable of consultants ready, that we could call them anytime, and not really knowing that we had to charge by the hour. So we corrected that, we've done that, and that was a couple of years ago, but we've stopped that practice. The other thing that we were looking forward to, because you know that, especially with regard to public safety, if there's an opportunity for us to augment the police or the fire in terms of their vehicles or any equipment that we can do, and we can do it on a grant-funded basis, it's helpful. So there was a misinterpretation of the regulations with regard to the police vehicle. We thought we could fund the police vehicle with CDBG funds, when in fact it was he could only do a fire vehicle. So we had to repay that, but we would have bought the vehicle anyways. We were just trying to see if we could leverage funds from the federal government. We paid the $57,000, I believe, but we would have bought it anyway. And so, reporting on Section 3, what we are doing, and it really goes along the line with what I was talking about with regard to laser fees, and just making sure that our policies and procedures match up, and we're able to verify that we're actually doing it. So we have, I was fortunate when I came in because I was able to hire a number of people, and all of them. And so actually, you have my assistant who's Brooke Souter, and then we have Lily Williams, who's our she's really the acting director of housing right now because we were, and then Linda, the asset manager, McClure. So I was able to hire these folks in the last 24 months. We've been able to really take a look at the programs, digest them, and I've actually met with HUD and have had numerous conversations about where we are, where we're going. And we were able to, even though we had some findings, we received one of the largest lead grants in the country. And so that portends to me that they are really confident in our ability to get houses in the queue and to remediate lead issues that are in the city. So we're going to go forward with that and continue on that basis. And there's an earmarking issue. Again, this is more along the lines of I think that people are not unsure of which categories to fund and to draw down funds on. So what I've done, and there's part of my staff is in training right now in Texas. We are absolutely adhering to training schedules, making sure that they are well aware of any new regulations coming down, that they're also keeping abreast of the marketplace and all the different programs that are available to them and the intricacies of these programs, because it's not intuitive. Out of law school, I cut my teeth at the Philadelphia Housing Authority and Hope 6 Finance, and drafted the Moving to Work program, but it's not intuitive. And you really have to immerse yourself in it. And so we're able to do that. I have a great team that's willing to work and willing to be trained. And so we have the right people, and we're going to train them, and then we're going to do the right thing. And so for your comfort level, We are addressing all of these issues. These issues, my team might shudder at this, but I intend to have these closed, within the calendar year next year. And that going forward, we're going to be more nimble in terms of identifying issues, and then really talking and being on the horn with HUD and addressing issues as they come up and making sure they're resolved. So the good news is that although there's a number of findings here, the mayor was well aware that there could be issues. 2 years ago, brought me in, we talked about it, and we addressed them. They take a little bit of time because these grants are in 3 or 5 year cycles. And so by the time they roll around and the auditors come in, then they'll see it, but you're in the process of really fixing those things. So to give credit to the mayor, he saw it. He's given us the ability to do it. He's given us the monies to really buy software that's going to help us, and really is a supporter of the training of the staff and making sure that we're not in the same situation going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Tina.
Thank you, that's great information. I was just wondering if you are receiving any pushback from the entities, the subgrantees that have received funds for however many years they've been receiving funds and now may not because they're not moving the needle.
So because there's been recent, I lost my director of housing. We were going to be, this fall, we were going to be entering into the new round of RFPs. So they've submitted them, but I've had to put another team of reviewers together. I intend to have those RFPs reviewed. We begin next week, correct? Tuesday. And then by the first of the year, we'll be able to communicate to the subrecipients what we've decided that they're going to be eligible for. And they're well aware of the new process and procedures. So we haven't had the blowback yet because we've not had that communication. We don't know, I actually don't know who's going to be awarded anything as of this moment.
Has there been education done about how to fill out the new applications?
Yes. So a lot of the issues that we have had, you could tell that there was a training gap. So Ms. Speak was before she left, she had held a series of events in the community that were specifically detailed and centered on the issue of the subrecipients and their applications. So I believe it was at least 2, there may have been 3, I think there were 2 of those events. So they were well attended, and there were a lot of questions, and all the questions were addressed either there or in subsequent correspondence with Ms. Higgins.
I have a question about next year's funding.
Yes.
How does that work? What is the calendar year cycle like to request funding? And then do you expect any issues for next year, either a decrease of funding or any issues with HUD scrutiny related to some of the findings that you're addressing?
So no, I think that what we're going to have the decrease in funding of about $152,000 based on this one. We have some monies, program monies that are in reserve right now, and so there's going to be no program interruption. Our fiscal year begins in October, and so we've already been, our funding has already been allocated. So on the CDGB side, it's...
Sorry to interrupt. When you say fiscal year, you're referring to a separate fiscal year for HUD? For HUD funding?
For HUD funding and for the Department of Housing. Yeah.
Separate from the city's fiscal year.
Correct, which is the calendar year. So I think it's...
October 1st to September 30th.
But the allocation, I don't...
It's 1.9.
It's 1.9. I think it was down from 2 million, but it wasn't. It's not. It's the 152,000.
And the allocation, sorry to interrupt again, but that has been declining year over year due to national issues.
National issues as well, but I think that we have an opportunity to do a couple of things. One, we have to leverage state and federal grants to get the programs that we want in. And so this year, really focusing on not on the subrecipient program, but there's a couple things we need to do. There's a home ownership program that we're going to reinitiate, affordable housing component as well. And so really taking those, and I think that once we have success in those areas, I think we're going to be able to leverage those and say, hey, look, we've had success, we could use some more funding. So as part of, let's say, the homeownership initiative, that's doing things like having educational, financial educational seminars for people, having down payment assistance. The affordable housing program is really to take a look at, and the mayor's really been involved in this, and taking a look at vacant lots and seeing if on a block by block basis, we can actually take those, cobble lots together, and then we'll RFP them to developers and see what they're going to do with them. We've allocated this year, out of those 1.9 million, for that program, we have about $300,000 allocated towards that. Hoping that developers will come in, they'll use some of our funds to leverage the project, and I kind of take the field of dreams approach. Like, build it, they will come. But we have to be strategic in what we're doing. I'd like to see some more activity in Allison Hill. I'd like to see some more activity uptown, because the foundation that we're really relying on here to get to continue the momentum of the administration is really housing, jobs, and schools. And so we're going to figure out how to do that. And this is a small little project that we're going to do. We'll see if we can gain some momentum and do it.
And then on the question of the cycle for the next round of funding, when is that? And do you think, in light of, it sounds like you feel, can you explain how confident you feel about your sort of grasp of the concerns with the funding, and do you anticipate any issues with the next cycle when we're reapplying?
Well, I don't want to choose myself, but hopefully not. And I don't think they'll be programmatic in nature in terms of, well, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. We're really going to hit any issues, and we're going to hit them, and we're going to hit them hard, and they're not going to let them linger. And you can see the evidence of that because we've taken this list and we've whittled it down to maybe 4 or 5 issues. So I think there's a confidence level with the folks that we deal with in HUD, especially the Philadelphia office. I've given my commitment. I've met with them, and I don't see that, but I'll be ready to pivot. I think we're going to have some successes that we're going to have to really put to the fore and make them know that the paradigm is shifting.
Thank you.
Just
Thank you.
one question. On segregation of duties, which is a key protection from fraud, as we all know. On your handout, it says was resolved in 2014. Am I not understanding this correctly? You're still getting findings for it 4 years
That's
later.
an IT one, and that's complicated.
So on some of these, there were multiple departments involved in these findings. The ones that involved housing, because that's Jeff was talking.
Yes.
We focused in on that. So the housing part of that was developed in 2014.
But there's still an IT problem.
Okay. All right.
Mark, do your compliance responsibilities extend beyond the housing department, or are you functioning only with regard to housing?
Well, we have to, the mayor and I have decided is that we're doing this in chunks because it's a massive operation.
Right.
Some departments already have their compliance checklist. When I first got here, it made everybody give me their compliance checklist. Some have them. We're developing them with others. Really, the focus has been housing, IT, and public works. And so we're taking those and we're going to start there. And all of this is happening in conjunction with the IT improvements. And so all of these things are happening at the same time. And it's really the coordination of these efforts that is where the rubber meets the road. And that's the fun part about it, but it can be the most distressing part.
I don't know if you wanted to mention, Artie, that we hope to
Yeah.
have a conversation.
In December, the mayor's offered to have someone come begin to frame up the IT conversation for us. So stay tuned for
Okay, now,
more.
hopefully I'll be there too, because Steve
More
and I can deal with that
complexities on
every day.
That's our December
Yeah.
conversation.
Right. Thank you, Mike, and thanks, Bruce, for that.
Thank you.
Now, Bruce, I'm going to
Come
turn.
back to Bruce.
I'm turning to you again for a very brief description of the budgeting process for the city. We are coming up to having the budget released next Tuesday, so anybody who doesn't have anything to do, come to city council and have a listen.
So, I won't read all this, but this is essentially cribbed from the internal process memo that I was speaking about before that we do in finance for almost everything.
I think you can get.
Oh, sorry. I can't help it. My Jewishness. Basically, so this is as of 12/31/18. So obviously this is going to be changed a bit with the ICA involvement and all that, but we're not quite all there yet, and we will revise the memo for, as we move forward. But basically, we started the process of doing a capital budget in the beginning of the year, Q1, Q2. I think we're going to try to continue to do that as we move forward. Traditionally, we did that based upon available resources from fund balance, not recurring revenue. We then basically then move into July, where we start really it's mid-year where you start the whole budgeting process for the next year. The budget office basically does some initial projections, fills out a lot of the templates, distributes templates to the various bureaus and departments. They are operational templates, obviously, as we talked about, and then those are then returned with their requests, how we've done it in the past, and they're returned and collated towards the end of August, beginning of September. Then in the middle of September, the mayor, finance department, and the different bureaus and departments all meet to go over that, work that through. You can have one meeting, you can have a series of meetings, it all really depends upon the complexity of the ask, of new information that comes up, and you sort of have an iterative process through, traditionally, at least for us, the middle of October, where then we were supposed to give a draft budget, not formatted, because that takes time, but in terms of the numbers, very large Excel spreadsheet with all the different revenues, projections, which also occur throughout the year, really starting in July, but you get a really good sense once you get into the end of Q3 at that point. And then that's codified and sent to DCD, which won't occur probably after this point, but it did force us to get a good 75% of that work done by the middle of October. Then end of October, DCD will come back and give us a comment on that. And then the truth of the matter is that you still have, new information reveals itself. You start getting into issues of capital projects that maybe did not finish, so you need to then reappropriate them in the next fiscal year, and all that comes together. We're still doing that even today as we are codifying our budget tomorrow, and in light of being presented to council on Tuesday. But it does come up to really the just-in-time date of when that is presented, which is in the fourth Tuesday of the month, to council, to the public. Then there's, the city council has, it's up to them how many budget hearings they want to have. This year, traditionally it's been about 2, but there could be more. They have a obligation to pass a budget signed by the mayor by the end of the calendar year, December 31st. And then the budget, in theory, can be reopened after a municipal election through February 15th of the next fiscal year. And that's, in short, the process.
We'll look forward to seeing how the ICA gets incorporated in
Yeah.
this, and I think, again, maybe Jeffrey
Right.
can help once you start refining this at the end of the year.
Sure.
The last item on the agenda has to do with the City of Harrisburg 5-year plan update. In March, we received the initial 5-year plan. And we've had discussions with the city, with the mayor, and have determined that the original submission expectation for an update was a little too tight. And so we had asked the city to present a formal request to change that date. And that is actually defined in the act that we are allowed to do that. And so we received a request to move the date to the end of April, allowing us to then workshop it, discuss it, and have it in final form for approval at our June meeting, so halfway through the year. And does anyone have any questions about that?
I think I'll ask this to Jeff, if it's okay with you. The act says one thing. We are all agreeing that the schedule needs to be modified. We also agree it's within the power of the authority to modify that schedule. Do you think they should make a motion to accept the revised schedule so that we can have that?
That's all right, I was going to do that.
Oh, I wasn't sure.
I think
I was asking a legal question.
Oh, sorry, no, and I knew that we had to
Yes.
make them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for jumping in.
I'm
Going
not-
too fast.
I'm not going to breathe again, I'm just going to keep
My
going really
apologies.
fast. So, having all that discussion occur, could I have a motion to accept the change in date to the end of April for submission of a draft with the expectation that it will be workshopped and completed by our June board meeting?
Make that motion.
Thank you. Second? Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just note that what the act said was 100 days before the end of the year, and I think it seems that that particular deadline is maybe not the best deadline for the business of the city. So it sounds like setting a better date will result in a better plan for the city.
I think so.
Sounds like a good piece of advice for us to report back to the legislature next time they
Right,
They
right,
can make
something
an
like
ICA
this,
for
yes.
us.
Great, so did I ask for all in favor?
We have a motion from Ralph and a second from Tina.
So, and that was a comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. Is there any other business from the board members that we didn't include that we need to bring up? If not, I'll open it up for any public comment. Yes, sir?
Eric Epstein, I want to follow up from the last meeting, and I may have missed it. I looked at the website, it looks nominally better, but I guess my question would be, I'm at a disadvantage. You're talking about an audit I can't see, and I don't know that I could find minutes on the website. I found agendas. I got to tell you, 6-7 months into it, it's a little late. When do you think, you've approved minutes, why aren't they posted? When will they be posted? And, again, the documents you're looking at, we can't see. I understand that. I'm on a board also, but when are these documents going to be posted? It's somewhat of a hardship to ask people to come into the city at 4 o'clock. And we had talked about it last time, so I'm just following up.
So to the best of my knowledge, I have forwarded to the webmaster all the minutes for previous meetings, not the minutes that were approved at tonight's meeting. Those were not posted on the website because they were draft minutes. They will be posted after tonight's meeting by the webmaster. So I will double check, but everything up to the meeting before should be on our website, but I'll double check.
Yeah, if you could, I couldn't.
And as for the city's audit, that we just sent that to the webmaster yesterday, and those might be posted as soon as today. But that was the first time we had an opportunity to post those on our website.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me. The city has a really well-functioning website. I mean, you can get that off of that. I'm just, for instance, we were talking about a document today that had to do with the auditor, and that's the document I was looking for. In fact, I have a couple questions to that. They're not in any kind of order. And some of these, I don't know if you can answer, Bruce, or, whomever or whatever, but I don't know how you book GASB pension for the city. Do you do it the same way as a school board? In other words, is it 100% liability even though your exposure is only 50%?
I truthfully,
I don't know. We have an actuary that does the OPEB liability calculation. I wouldn't know. The liability is what's calculated. It's presented on the financial statements. I'm not familiar with the school
Gatsby
district.
changed the regs so that you are now accountable. PSER serves everybody. I don't know if it extends to the city for 100%.
I believe that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. But who would be contacted for all that? Who would I follow up with?
Send me an email. I'll go talk to our auditors or our actuary and get that information to you. But I wouldn't know it would be any less than 100%
Yeah.
from the actuarial calculated valuation.
These questions may be answered, but you have some grants that are not on 5-year cycles. I'm not really sure how you would book CFA funding or how you would book gaming grants. How do you look at that? Because my assumption is every year you have a list of gaming grants that are submitted, approved, or not approved. How is that? Pardon?
So I'm not sure what your question is.
My question is, we were talking about grants, at least on the housing side, that, are a 5-year cycle. Gaming grants are annually. What I'm trying to determine, and there's several different pots, actually 3, most people think there's 2, but if you're applying for security gaming grants from the DA or just gaming grants from the gaming fund, how's that recorded in your budget?
It depends. You book the revenue when it's received. Sometimes the grants, it doesn't hit our books. Sometimes it's a direct pay. It depends how it's structured. It could be a reimbursement grant, but so we book the revenue, and we book the expenditure, and then if it's a project that takes longer than 1 year, it's capital nature, then you accrue the potential, liability or receivable, depending upon whether you're speaking about revenue receiving or expenditures to still be incurred in future periods. But it kind of depends upon the grant agreement, how,
So there
the
would be a
terms.
section in your books that would be gaming grants?
No,
It would be
no.
based on the personality?
It wouldn't necessarily be articulated that way. We have a revenue line item of maybe gaming grant income revenue, but the expenditure, and then in the CIP portion of it, if it's a capital project, you would denote it, that's where it's funded from, but there's no separate section for grants per se.
So there's really no premeditated expectations of what you're going on in a year? Is the expectation revenue neutral, or is the expectation, I don't know what the city normally gets.
There's no normal, it's what you apply for, what you receive.
I can say that let me jump in and say, our expectation as a city is that on a yearly basis, we usually apply for either police or fire as a public safety gaming grant.
Right.
We've decided to alternate rather than have them compete with each other. So this past year was fire. We would anticipate next year would be police. What we are awarded is always less than what we ask for and is always at the discretion of the Dauphin County Gaming Review Board. So we don't
That's
know.
normally you get less than you expect. I guess there's an expectation that every year there will be some revenue coming in.
Well, there's a hope every year that we will, and we certainly apply every year.
Has there ever been a time when you haven't gotten money?
And we have always gotten something.
Okay,
Yeah, and so it's generally booked in police or fire, and it's
But
part
last
of their
year, we
budget.
have
Yeah.
IT.
But last year was the first, I was going to say that, last year was the first year that we applied for something other than police or fire.
Well, I think a lot
But-
depends on what
okay.
what their priorities are.
But in terms of our expectation, we anticipate applying for either police or fire every year, and then potentially other departmental priorities on a sort of yearly basis.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you can answer these.
Sorry, and Eric, I'm going to ask, these are very specific questions, and I do think it's not appropriate to think that Bruce can answer all these off the top of his head. So I might suggest, if you don't mind, emailing them to him.
I'll email, but I'll also like to make it public record. I've been doing this for a long time, and email can be imprecise, and I don't have confidence right now until I see a website. So, it's nothing to do with them personally. I think I have the opportunity. I'll ask the questions and not ask for a response.
Okay.
But I was here last time when CRW presented, raised my hand 3 times, and it was ignored. So I'm feeling a little brittle right now.
And I will say that we did give you time to talk at the public comment when we're having presentations done and when people are on a tight time frame. I prefer not to have them interrupted unless they've specifically said.
Totally understand, but my protocol would have been, and this is my preference, those people should have been available after the meeting, so I could have directed questions there. I don't want to also double my time where I have to go back to CRW or whatnot. I don't think it's an unreasonable request. I think it's reasonable not to allow me to participate. I'm not a member, but at the end, I mean, they just walked out. So let me just ask the remainder of my questions, and I'll send them by email. If you know me, you'll have them first thing in the morning. I don't anticipate an immediate response. I was also concerned, and I haven't looked at it, maybe there on how you book legacy environmental issues, which the city has. I don't know if it's an ARO, asset retirement obligation, or if it's done in the corporate nomenclature of it's an open issue. There are some liabilities that every city has, no fault of their own. I'm just trying to figure out what our liabilities here are. The other thing is just a question I think is an opportunity. We were talking about opportunities. The census is about to be done. I don't know what the population is, but I think as we're all aware, you get above the 50,000 level, your opportunities change radically. So I'd encourage you, and I make this stop at a lot of places, and that you have opportunities that change, especially with Department of Agriculture. If you're below 50, you got some funding there. So I'd encourage you to look at that. I know I do. It sounds kind of boring and nerdy, but that's what it is. You were talking about RFPs for the accountant. Are there going to be RFPs, and this is my last question, for other professional services, or are there contracts that exist for a longer period of time?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Eric, and I know Bruce will look forward to that email early tomorrow morning. Any other questions? Hearing none, I conclude this meeting. Call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
The first. Yes, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.